Salutations everybody, it is Matty here today. Hope you're all doing absolutely excellent. I think I can take a guess as to who's not doing absolutely excellent today, and that's likely the war room at Nintendo right now. I can imagine there's quite a bit of panic at this time, and understandably so, because Nintendo has elected to launch a console at the worst imaginable time. Just circumstances of the real world clashing with what I think are some pretty bad decisions have led to what felt like a layup of a console launch turning into the disaster we're going to discuss today. Now, I think Nintendo did get some parts of this right. Like, all I personally wanted after the Switch 1 was a more powerful version of that. And understandably, it would come at a higher price. That's okay. And what I played, it feels like I'm getting that. I think the Switch 2, from what I saw in my hands-on event, is going to be great. The $450 price tag, or $500 if you pack in Mario Kart World, wasn't the real sticker shock to me. But obviously, as we start to get into the conversation today, that price can even change. The price of games right now remains a problem for people. And I think more concerning is Nintendo is betting on what has really won them a lot of their best-selling games, which is ignoring what people like me and you have to say. I use Pokemon Scarlet and Violet as a great example. Gamers have had this narrative established about them, and I think in a lot of times it ends up being true where they can't really back up their talk. You know, you look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, it is a obviously technically broken game. It is awful looking, and I have a high technical tolerance, but good God almighty. Despite that, despite the noise online, the clear awareness created around it, Pokemon's just a strong brand, man. Sold about 30 million units. That's incredible. So why would Nintendo listen when, despite all the noise, they push through and sell that many copies of a game? A game that, by the way, all those problems I talk about didn't get patched out. Maybe they will with the free update on Switch 2. We'll see. That's what I'm really hoping for. But the Switch 2 launch, if they stick to this June 5th date, is going to be a real test of Nintendo's brand power. The Wii U does keep them humble in a lot of people's minds, right? This is the moment Nintendo learned, hey, we can't just bull rush our way to success, even if the Wii U was great in a lot of ways. We just can't force ourselves into that pocket. So in a world where success isn't guaranteed and we see all of this backlash online compared to sometimes when Nintendo gets backlash and still finds success, I do think it's anybody's guess what kind of success Nintendo does find with the Switch 2 at its launch. But real world circumstances are beginning to collide with their launch. We're going to dive into that and so much more. So if you're new here, you're into what's going on with Nintendo. We have been talking about them a lot lately. We just put up an over 30-minute video of my hands-on time with the Switch 2 and a bunch of the launch titles or launch window titles. So go ahead and check that out if you missed it. But let's get started talking about tariffs. I'd like to preface this all with one thing, right? I try to stay, apolitical just because, look, I'm a gamer. I'm here to give you gaming takes, tell you what entertainment's worth your time or not worth your time. You're not here to get my political takes. I think of this clip with Bill Murray where he's like, I'm a comedian. You don't want to hear my thoughts on this stuff. And I'm right in the same boat. It's like, I'm not going to be sitting here trying to be an economist, a politician. That's not what I'm here to do. But the reality is the real world has clashed with the entertainment industry in a significant way here where poor Nintendo, am I right? Launching a console at the worst imaginable time because tariffs have hit Vietnam, which is where Nintendo was producing the Switch 2. And as we'll talk about in a moment, that can risk a price increase if those tariffs do not go away. But I'll preface all of this by saying that Trump's apparently meeting with Vietnam. They're looking to have positive talks, and hopefully those tariffs are a thing of the past so that gamers can thrive on with their $450 or $500 console and not worry too much about at least that part of the package jumping in price. However, GameStop did make the first post that really broke the internet of pre-orders for the Switch 2 in the US will not start on April 9th, their originally announced date, in order to assess the potential impact of tariffs and the evolving market conditions. Nintendo will update timing at a later date, and the launch date is unchanged. Now, the news today is that also Nintendo Switch 2 in Canada will not start pre-orders on April 9th, and again, they do say that the launch date of June 5th, 2025 is unchanged. If you ask me, I think there are compelling reasons for Nintendo to change the price as a business. I also think there aren't very compelling reasons for them to do so, and those are more obvious. The compelling reason for them to change the price is this. All these hardware manufacturers here, Nintendo, Xbox, PlayStation, they all take a loss on these consoles because they make all of their money back on software sales. That's always been the business model, and Nintendo is showing no signs of changing from that here. They're not trying to make profit on a console, especially when they're selling you $80 games. I think the profit margins for games like Kirby Kirby going up to $80 now. Crazy, by the way. And I say as someone who loved the new Kirby game, but yeah, the profit margins will be insane on their software. So Nintendo's left with a few choices, right? They can jack up the price to minimize the loss they're probably already taking on the hardware, or Nintendo can eat a bigger loss on the hardware front to try to get more people through the door. But I fear what that does mean for their software. If they've already jumped to 80, I do open the door to 90. I'm like, well, hello, because I wonder if GTA is going to stick at 80. I think a lot of people have already settled like, yeah, GTA will just be an $80 game. I'm like, I don't know, right? We had that one report come out that was pushing the idea of $100, and I could see Take-Two just going for the bank here. I really could, and just creating that entire variable of like, now other companies can jump to that point. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but I still think that GTA 6 might blow past $80, frankly. So it's really a question of like, does Nintendo believe in their brand power, their marketing, their product enough where even if they jump the price $50, $100, whatever it may be, again, I have not done the calculations. I don't know what they're going to end up being, but if Nintendo does jump this price at all, will people still buy in? And that's tough to say in today's economy, man. Like it's tough. Everything's expensive right now. Everything, every industry, every facet of our life is expensive. And the reality that I think a lot of people aren't grabbing onto is video games are a luxury. I love video games. It is a big part of my day-to-day life, not just in my work, but I love playing them. It is like so core to my life that I could argue sometimes it is mandatory, but at the end of the day, it is not. And so as a luxury item, Nintendo may view things differently. And I could see this price scaling based on what's happening right now in the world. If those tariffs do hold, because Nintendo did move the production of the Switch 2 over to Vietnam to avoid the tariffs. They've come for them anyway, and they've been higher than expected. So again, I really, truly do wonder what the thought process is there, because now they're forced to make a choice. And I also wonder if they delay the Switch launch. I think that is another way they could go about this, because right now about 300K units have been produced, moved to the United States. Do you wait out these political talks, see what the result of all of this is, and then from there make a decision on when this can launch? I don't know if you can even do that because of the amount of software that then gets delayed as well. But one thing people thought happened with the price tag of the Switch 2 is that it was already adjusted for the tariff. So Nintendo would be adjusting it again. But here from Forbes, they titled their article, Nintendo didn't price in Trump tariffs for Switch 2, justifies $80 Mario Kart World. Nintendo is now offering various executives for interviews attempting to justify this, but it's unlikely that many fans are going to be satisfied with what they're hearing. Here's Nintendo of America's Vice President of Product and Player Experience, Bill Trinen, speaking with IGN, quote, I would say it's less about the strategy of pricing Mario Kart World and more of just whenever we look at a given game, we just look at what is the experience and what's the content and what's the value, Trinen said. But honestly, this is a game that is so big and so vast, and you will find so many little things in it to discover, and there's still some other secrets remaining that I think as people end up buying and playing the game, they're going to find this to be probably the richest Mario Kart experience they've ever had. There's a separate interview with Doug Bowser at Wired where he also addresses the big question that's been asked this week about how Trump's new enormous tariffs might affect Switch 2 pricing. Some believe tariffs may have already been priced into the high $450 price ahead of time, but that's not true. Bowser says the tariffs weren't factored into pricing before this reveal and that it is actively assessing the situation, which creates a challenge, and it's something we're going to have to address. Meanwhile, Doug Bowser had something interesting to say here. Nintendo America president addresses the Switch 2 game price complaints, and he says, what you see right there is variable pricing, Bowser told the Washington Post. We'll look at each game, really look at the development that's gone into the game, the breadth and depth of the gameplay, if you will, and the durability over time and the repeatability of gameplay experiences. Now, to be fair in this conversation here, we have to consider how Nintendo handles post-launch support, which is very different from the rest of the industry. For example, if you're a Switch Online subscriber, they're really packing a lot of value in there now, where I do think it is a worthwhile subscription service. As much as I don't agree with certain things like, hey, why is back compat only here? Like, why can't we have that on the Switch eShop? Those sorts of things aside, I think when you combine the Switch Online services, the amount of Mario Kart 8 DLC, for example, and now you're packing in free Switch 2 upgrades with it, I do think just for the price you pay per year, which is $50, it does pay for itself. I say that because right now we're looking at Mario Kart World, which is $80, and we're looking at Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is $70. And I had a question about that. Like, why are these prices different? I think it's because Mario Kart World will get new tracks, expansions, characters, rides, whatever it may be. I don't know if there's going to be missions in this free roam mode, but point being is that Mario Kart World is going to get a lot of post-launch support. And I imagine much like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, where they practically doubled the size of the game. And if you were a Switch Online subscriber, that just kept adding in that value. Or if you're like me and I haven't fired up Mario Kart 8 in a while, when I do fire it up, the game just doubled in size overnight. Like, that's cool. Because Nintendo keeps packing in that free DLC with that subscription service, I think that is also considered in the price proposition of, like, they could charge you $70 and then charge you for every single map pack that they do, or they could just account for it at $80 with this new variable pricing that Doug Bowser's talking about, and then pack in all the DLC into the Switch Online service. I think the unsatisfactory part of this answer, in my opinion, really does come down to the trust us bro energy of it all. Like, to me, in a lot of ways, Nintendo's already been overcharging for their games. Have you looked at, as someone who, by the way, guilty as charged, will be buying it, not putting my money where my mouth is in this moment, but Pokemon Legends ZA does not look like a $60, $70 title. It just doesn't. And especially when Digital Foundry broke it down, and they were like, yeah, this thing's dropping into the 20 frames. I'm like, looking like that? How is that possible? So Nintendo's saying, well, we're going to scale it based on the content that's there and all that stuff. You know, they're showing it a little bit here because they're thinking Mario Kart World's a bigger game than, say, a Donkey Kong Bonanza. But it doesn't change that I feel Nintendo overcharges for things. I look at what they're doing with Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I bought and played that game. I think it is fantastic. I beat it within a day or two. And even with the added expansion pack that I played at the Switch 2 event, as well as the upgraded visuals and stuff, this is a game that they're trying to charge $80 for now with the Switch 2 version. I'm like, how and why? In what world is that actually worth it? But this goes down to what I think Nintendo's going to bet big on this generation, that literally is just like their brand power. Like, you're going to pay for this anyway. You're going to adjust. Like, this is going to be the new normal, because it's like a Pandora's box moment. You just can't put that back in, especially with Nintendo starting it. It's like, if they didn't, GTA would have. And so one way or another, I think the floodgates would have opened. But I think worse yet with all these responses is this one right here. We got an article from CBC. It says, for Nintendo Switch 2, Trump tariffs could be an unbeatable final boss. Quote, we recognize that there are some people that may not be able to afford the Switch 2's price point. That's why we wanted to make sure the other Switch platforms are available so people still have an opportunity to come into our gaming universe, be part of these characters in these worlds, and see value, if you will, in whatever rung of the platform they come in. End quote. Bowser wouldn't share a target number, but he said that Nintendo believes the Switch 2 can be as successful as its immediate predecessor. That's a high bar, as the original Switch has sold more than 150 million units worldwide, making it the third best-selling games console of all time. Continuing on, he says, quote, sure, there are extenuating outside circumstances that could affect positively or negatively, and we can't necessarily control those. What we can control is what we think we've got, a device that is going to bring more developers onto the platform that we can lean into as a developer ourselves or a publisher ourselves, and as a result, bring a lot of smiles to people's faces, quote, he said. This reminds me, as I know a lot of people already said this, but this does remind me of a certain Xbox executive. I'll let you relive this moment from the Xbox One launch cycle. Enjoy.
It's a great line for games. Yeah, and I think people are going to love it, and then they're going to understand what we're trying to create and how it links games and entertainment, the functionality of the box, some of the advantages that you get of having a box that is designed to use an online state. So that, to me, is a future-proof choice, and I think people could have arguably gone the other way if we didn't do it, and fortunately we have a product for people who aren't able to get some form of connectivity. It's called Xbox 360.
Right. So stick with 360. That's your message if you don't, like it?
If you have zero access to the internet, that is an offline device. I mean, seriously, when I read the blogs and thought about who's really the most impacted, there was a person who said, hey, I'm on a nuclear sub. Right. And I don't even know what it means to be on a nuclear sub, but I've got to imagine that it's not easy to get an internet connection.
So yeah, maybe not as aggressive and standoffish, but absolutely 1000% the same energy. And that's why I think the Switch 2 will run into a very similar issue that this generation is running into, where that adoption, that full transition to, like, say, Xbox Series X, PlayStation 5, is going to take a while. Like, Nintendo might not budge on prices or anything, because I think they're going to be still making these games for Switch 1 for years and years and years, with just the Switch 2 editions that'll pack in better visuals, better frame rate, those sorts of things. Speaking of pack-ins, though, Switch tutorial game Welcome Tour costs $10. Nintendo explains why it's not a free console pack-in. IGN can now confirm that Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour costs $9.99 and is a digital-only product. That's significantly cheaper than other Switch 2 games, but IGN also reported to the complaints from some Nintendo fans that Welcome Tour costs money at all, with many saying it should be a Switch 2 pack-in as DualSense tech demo game Astro's Playroom was for PlayStation 5. IGN interviewed Nintendo of America's Vice President of Product and Player Experience, Bill Tridon, at a recent Switch 2 preview event in New York and asked him if Nintendo discussed making World Tour a pack-in game and why the company made the decision to price it as a separate digital product. We need to point out here that our interview with Tridon was conducted on April 3rd, 2025, prior to Nintendo's announcement about delaying Switch 2 pre-orders in the US due to potential impact of tariffs and subsequent concern that Nintendo may raise the price of the console and its games further as a result, which the latter I don't think will happen, by the way. Quote, "It's an interesting product," end quote. Tridon begins, quote, "We're actually getting ready today. We're going to be doing some Nintendo Treehouse Live segments and covering a lot of games in detail. That's one of them. And I think people will see through Treehouse Live probably a bit more maybe than you were able to see on the show floor. It's a pretty robust piece of software. There's a lot of great detail in there. For some people, I think there are people who are particularly interested in the tech and the specs of the system and things like that. For them, I think it's going to be a great product. It's really for people that want more information about the system rather than necessarily a quick intro to everything it does. And for that reason, and just the amount of care and work that the team put into it, I think it was decided that, yeah, this feels like $9.99 is not an exorbitant price, and it feels like good value for what you're getting out of the product, end quote. No. I played it. No. I don't care what you got in the tuck there. No. That's not a $5 game, in my opinion. It's not. No one cares enough about the Switch 2 hardware to be like, I'm going to pay for a game to experience what the Switch 2 hardware is capable of. And especially Nintendo, you're copying a part of the playbook, right? Which is, oh, pack-in game. That's cute. Okay, look at Astro's Playroom. And then it turned into Game of the Year winner Astro Bot. Now, I'm not saying Welcome Tour 2 will be Game of the Year winner by any stretch of the imagination. However, I do think of like Wii Sports. I think of these pack-in games that became very much core to Nintendo's console identity. I remember reading Reggie Fils-Aimé's book, and he talked about the fight to pack in Wii Sports, and obviously we know now, seeing the Wii, the difference that made. I'm not saying Welcome Tour is going to push hundreds of millions of units. I'm not going to trick myself into that, but Welcome Tour, like Astrobot, like Wii Sports, are all great ways to get into the console ecosystem. It's more of a dip in the pool, you know, just checking out the temperature, seeing what's going on here. It's not the game you're going to go back to a million times, but it's a good, welcoming product for people buying into your system. And I don't think Nintendo expected the Wii Fit trainer, for example, to turn into a Smash Bros character, but that's just how the personality, the enrichment of Nintendo care and IP can turn into something far bigger than they ever anticipated it to be. This just feels like a miss in so many areas. Like, why couldn't the Welcome Tour character end up being a fun little Smash character in some way? I know there's a chance it may sound like I'm away from the point now, but again, I look at how Mii's turned into like Wii Sports, Wii Fit, like it was this ecosystem, this experience, but siling off an instruction manual and being like, it's for the people who care about this sort of stuff. It's like, we probably would care if it were free, but since it's not, even $10, I'm like, dude, I'm good. I'm good. You know, like when you look at the Nintendo Switch Online subscription, even, I think just comparing to that, just throwing $10 toward that instead, much better choice. Now, things do start to spiral a little bit more because Polygon writes, Nintendo confirms you will have to pay to use the Switch's C button. This was not something I really thought about when they first introduced it and said, this is the chat button, but this button is pointless if you do not have Switch Online. And I do think it is very weird console design to have a button that is only valuable to you if you are paying for a subscription service. I think of, if I have my Xbox controller right here, this guide button or this share button just not mattering at all unless I'm paying for Xbox Live, or this touchpad, this PlayStation button, this microphone. I don't know what I could really point out in the controller, but every button is available for everyone. This is the pause button, the options button, this is the share button. Like, it works for you out of the box. And so it's just really weird to know that there's a button there that only functions if you are paying a subscription service. It's like, why didn't they just make the home button lead into a chat app. That would be my solution there. Nonetheless, it says Nintendo has made its own Discord-like chat app for Switch 2, and it's going to charge you for it. Once the free period is over on March 31st, 2026, Game Chat and the C button that activates it will require a Switch Online membership. So what happens if you aren't a subscriber and press the C button? Not much, Vice President of Player and Product Experience Bill Trinan told Polygon in a recent interview. You would be able to find out about the Nintendo Switch Online subscription there and get a sense of some of the functionality, he said. But unless you have an active Nintendo Switch Online subscription, you'll have a whole button dedicated to nothing on your Switch. It doesn't even sound like you can remap it to something else. It'll just be a reminder of the $19.99 you may or may not be handing to Nintendo every year. Trinan says the C button has a price tag because Game Chat is, quote, part of the overall platform experience, end quote, and that, quote, NSO really is a critical piece of the Nintendo Switch 2 experience, end quote. He listed off some of the new Switch 2 exclusive benefits, like access to old GameCube games and free upgrades to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So there you have it. That's all of the information. And I think people are foolish to think Nintendo's just going to bend over backwards and give you everything for free. Like, I'm not in that camp in particular. Like, if we go back to our Pandora's Box example, I don't think you can just take back the $80 game prices. People will say, oh, push back. But again, GTA 6 looming, it's going to get pushed whether you like it or not. And it's going to be just like when it jumped to 70, you're going to get some games that absolutely earn that $70. You're going to get some games that you wonder why they're not charging half of that. I don't think you can put Game Chat back in the box. You know, this is something that is already built on the piece of hardware itself. It is a useless button if you are not paying for Switch Online. I can say for myself, I get value out of Switch Online. It's worth it to me, so this isn't a concern for me, but for you, it might be if you don't find much value in Switch Online. There is also the whole thing about paying for being able to chat with your friends when you have free communication servers like Discord, which is what my friends and I use. So there is also that. I do think you can change Welcome Tour. I do think that is something you could change. I think this can just turn into a pack-in experience. But now with the tariffs looming, how much does Nintendo really want to eat? If they end up having these tariffs go through, it's like, yep, well, looks like the Switch hardware is going to be more expensive to make and then export to, say, like the United States. Okay. So now we're also going to give them a free $10 game because they complained about it. Does that soften the blow a little bit? I don't think so. Nintendo just loses more money on it. So I don't know if they actually will change Welcome Tour, but it does seem to me like the easiest thing to adjust. I think there's other ways to win. Like, hey, we'll sell you the GameCube games. We'll sell you the Game Boy games. Like, we'll bring back, say, an experience like the Virtual Console, but it'll be on the Switch eShop. I don't think you can take back saying we have a Switch 1. I do think this is a quote that won't follow Doug Bowser and infamy quite like it does, say, Don Matrick with the Xbox One, just because of like how horrible of a spot Xbox One was in compared to the PS4, which is saying a lot when you look at the situation Switch 2 is in. But I do think if the Switch 2 doesn't go as Nintendo is hoping, this quote will be resurrected a million times over. So yeah, I don't envy Nintendo at all. They have a lot of really tough decisions to make. This is an awful time to be launching a system, and if you were to ask me like a gut feeling, not like a raw, true prediction based on information, but like my gut feeling now is like, I do struggle to imagine them pushing through this much adversity, but I do think it does still find some level of success. Does it find Switch 1 success out the gate? That's tough to do. You got to remember, this thing launched with Breath of the Wild, which was a generational video game for many, many people. And Nintendo had a new idea there. The Switch felt like the answer to a lot of people's prayers, like this handheld experience, and it's very Nintendo at the same time as being a console experience. Like, there was a lot of excitement driving it. Now a lot of people are going to look at this and be like, why would I give up my Switch 1 if you're going to be making games for it? I think the adoption of the Switch 2, my gut feeling, will be a bit slower, especially if the prices adjust in a negative way, continue to go in that direction. I just think, again, games will be recognized as what they are, which is a luxury item, and just people will be like, I don't need that now. Maybe Switch 2 does have a big surge in the holiday window when people are spending more, when holiday deals are happening. If Nintendo chooses to put anything on sale at all, I don't think they'll put their hardware on sale, but that's kind of where my head's at right now. I don't really have a ton of faith that much will change. I think Nintendo's just going to push through this all and see how it goes, and I think the most we see is maybe a release date change. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, those are my guesses. That's the information. Quite a lot to go over today, so thank you for sitting down for another long Nintendo video. Let me know your thoughts down below. Other than that, I'll catch all of you in the next one. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.